In this Elden Ring video, we're going to cover the 1.07 patch changes. This patch just released for Elden Ring. There are a staggering amount of changes in this patch, arguably the largest patch yet for Elden Ring. So we're going to run through those. This is going to be kind of a long video. The biggest change, obviously, is to PvP, so strap in for that. And I think I'm going to do a separate video tomorrow that's going to kind of go through the existing builds I've made and how some of these changes will affect that, because I feel like otherwise this video is going to run really, really long. So starting off with the PvP changes, damage scaling now for weapon skills and spells is going to be separate in PvP than it is in co-op and PvE. This is something that MMOs typically do. They separate skills, or they have some sort of way of balancing PvP so that it's not as much damage as in single player or co-op. If you look at Elder Scrolls Online, they have a Battle Spirit buff that does something similar. If you look at Lost Ark, they have different tooltips for PvP over PvE. So this is something that online RPGs or MMORPGs have done, and Elden Ring's kind of been moving closer to that in terms of, how this is all functioning. So this isn't a huge surprise, but it will be curious to see how this actually works in practice. What we know so far is that they've increased the stamina attack power in PvP against guarded foes, except for long-range weapons. I'm assuming that's to counter, just like perma-block builds or builds that basically can just sit there and tank hits over and over. And they've also increased the poise damage in PvP of every weapon's normal attack, except for skills and long-range weapons. So they want people to be able to stagger each other and break each other's guard more, but they don't necessarily want them to increase their damage. For instance, all the Ashes of War in PvP have been lowered across the boards in terms of their power. So, you're not going to die from Ash of War as easily, but you're going to get staggered more often, or you're going to get guard broken more often if you're using those sort of builds. Additionally, some of the spells, notably the Dragon Breath of spells, mostly have been nerfed across the boards in terms of their attack power. Apparently, these are being abused in PvP, and reducing their effectiveness in PvP should help balance it. I'm sure there are other changes that are going to be coming to specific weapons and specific spells, but obviously, I think they wanted to start somewhere and then slowly work in things. I think that's a good approach here. Probably don't want to go overboard and then have to walk it back. I have PvP'd a ton in all three Souls games, Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, and Demon Souls. Absolutely love the PvP in those games. I have done almost zero PvP in Elden Ring. I did some during the network test, and that was about it. I basically realized that this game has too many broken combinations for me to really, really enjoy it, and it didn't become skill-based at some point. A lot of times you just run into invaders with broken combinations that gave you no chance at winning, and they were just sort of toying with you. And that's not super fun. I've avoided PvP in Elden Ring. I'm hoping the fact that they're finally getting around to balancing this stuff will bring players like myself back into the PvP space and sort of re-energize PvP in this game. Moving along to some of the general balancing adjustments, they've increased the poise damage when using two-handed normal attacks. They've increased the speed of some colossal swords, as well as the speed of some colossal weapon attacks. They've decreased the recovery time of some colossal swords and colossal weapons, except for jump attacks and dual-wield attacks. They've increased poise damage of hammers, great hammers, and some colossal weapons. They've increased the guard penetration of basically weapons that had guard penetration, like the Shawtels and Reapers. And they've increased the poise rating of some attacks for great swords, colossal weapons, curved swords, great axes, great hammers, great spears, and halberds for some of these attacks. But effectively what this is showing me is that they're buffing the weapon types that are used the least. First of all, not too many people two-hand a great sword or a colossal weapon, or these days, maybe colossal weapons, but regular weapons they don't normally two-hand because most people dual wield because jump attacks are better, or even with light weapons, the case dual wielding is better. So they're trying to buff single weapon two-handed damage and also buff weapon types that aren't being used as much, like great hammers and hammers. Their damage is outpaced by some of these other types, so they're buffing their poise damage and stuff like that so that you'll want to use them. And same with the Shawtels. Not too many enemies block in the game, so buffing the damage that goes through that will make them more effective and more tempting. Also in PvP encounters, it'll make them more effective, which is probably where you'll find most of these being used. What this is telling me is that From Software has been collecting data on what's being used and not being used, and this is a theme of this balancing patch, and they're trying to get players to use these weapon types, and they're trying to entice them by making them more viable. Additionally, poise on armor has been increased. So what that means is that as a player, you're going to be able to withstand attacks from enemies more easily, but because they're buffing the poise of armor and the poise damage of some of these weapon types, they won't be more effective in PvP, but they'll be more effective in PvE. You're also going to get more benefit out of the Great Shield Talisman and Hammer Talismans. So there's some adjustment there. These are ones that are probably not used all that often. And something interesting is that the effects of Scholar's Shield, Barricade Shield, and Shield Grease work better now on shields with lower guard boost, and they're less effective on shields with higher guard boost. So they're trying to prevent permablock builds, but also make lower guard shields more viable with these abilities. So if you're trying to go for like a block build, you're probably going to not put Scholar's Shield or Barricade Shield in these, or Shield Grease, as much as you would in the past if you're using something like a Great Shield. But if you're using a medium shield, then these become much more viable to you. So it's probably going to change the way that those are used. You might use them in some sort of build where you are using a medium shield, like maybe if you're playing an Enchanted Knight or some sort of build that isn't focused necessarily on blocking, but does use blocking, unlike a Great Shield build. A couple of other miscellaneous changes: that the Fingerprint Stone Shield's guard boost has been reduced, and the status effect buildup done by dual wield weapons has been decreased. So when you're dual wielding and you're trying to do status effect builds, it's not going to be as effective as it once was. That's a huge change in my opinion. It'll be curious to see exactly how much that impacts it. So basically after that, most of the changes involve magic and Ash of War adjustments. So moving along to the magic incantation adjustments first, you're seeing a lot of upward adjustments, and just scrolling through these, what you'll notice is these are probably most of the spells that aren't used as often. There are exceptions, like Lightning Spear is probably a staple for a lot of people. Black Flame is a staple for a lot of people. But just looking through the list, you'll notice that most of these spells aren't used all that often. Briars of Sin, Briars of Punishment is on there, so our Sanguine Spellblade build will be more effective. And Rancor Call and Ancient Death Rancor is on there. We have a Death Mage build coming out very shortly, so you'll see that this has also been buffed. But on this list, you'll notice that most of these spells, haven't been in any recent builds because, frankly, they just haven't been strong enough. So most of them are getting buffs, which is absolutely fantastic. It'll take some time to sort out what is viable and what is not viable now, going through them, as now further testing is needed. But it's really good to see. Again, they must be gathering data on what's used, unless they simply watch my build videos and notice that none of these are in there, which I highly doubt. And seeing that players are not using these spells as much, that's not to say that they're not being used at all. But a lot of these spells don't see much use, and it'll be curious to see if they finally see some use after this patch. Also, one downward adjustment I want to mention is that Rotten Breath and Exite's Decay have been reduced. The Scarlet Rot status effect buildup has been reduced on these. These were extremely powerful spells to begin with. So I'm not surprised, because their damage was also good. So I'm not surprised that these are being nerfed. And along with the status effect buildup of dual weapons, I think From Software is trying to shift the meta around here and make things even more viable. One of the things that I really like about Elden Ring is that there's so many things that are viable, but there are still things that are stronger than others. And this patch really seems like they're trying to make even more things viable. Moving along to the weapon skills that got upward adjustments. Glintstone Pebble is on there. I always felt this one was a bit low on the damage side of things. Maybe not the follow-up attack, but the spell part of it. Nebula is on there for some reason. Nebula is extremely powerful in my opinion. So this is even stronger now. That's crazy. Sword Dance is on there. This was already strong in my opinion, but now the delay between the end of various actions and being able to perform a skill is better. So is Aoche's Dancing Blade, which I thought was already strong. Couple other things that are good: the duration of effects for Sacred Order, Shared Order, Knowledge Above All, Soul Stifler, and Barricade Shield have been increased. Barricade Shield's duration, when it got nerfed a few patches back, made it almost unusable, so that's good to see that it's been extended. Sacred Order and Shared Order are almost never used as skills because of Golden Vow, so that's also good to see that those have been buffed. That'll make those more viable on weapons as well, and give you a buffing option that's not faith-related necessarily. A lot of other weapon skills on here that you'll notice haven't been in any of our builds are here. I mean, Prayerful Strike, Great Serpent Hunt, Wild Strike, Spinning Strikes, Ground Slam, Golden Slam, Erdtree Slam, Stamp, Upward Sweep, Impaling Thrust, Piercing Fang, These are ones you typically see in the builds that we make because they're just not that great. Loretta's Slash has been buffed. Poison Mothlight's been buffed. Stormcaller's been buffed. Sacred Blade has been buffed. I mean, Sacred Blade, talk about one of those simple Ashes of War that was great at the beginning of the game that's just terrible by the end of the game. That's now getting added damage, added duration. So that's fantastic. It casts faster. Imagine that being, better. And Bloody Slash is being buffed again. Status effect buildup and attack power being increased. And the delay between the end of the skill and being able to perform an action is also being reduced. So you're not going to be locked into the animation as long. That was nerfed and now buffed again, which is kind of crazy. You'll see that there's a lot of skills on here that is the case with. Stormblade's being buffed. Flaming Strike's being buffed. Lightning Slash is being buffed. Bloodblade is being buffed. Just tons and tons of abilities that aren't being used because they weren't as viable as other weapon skills are being buffed in this patch, which is absolutely fantastic to see. A couple of other notable ones that have been changed. Moonlight Greatsword's getting its stamina consumption reduced for strong and charged attacks, which is fantastic. Reduvia's Bloodblade's getting increased its damage. Night and Flame Stance is getting its attack power increased. I mean, this was nerfed. Now it's getting buffed again, which is crazy. Another one you guys will never believe me. Blade of Death and Destined Death are getting the duration of their HP debuffs extended, so it's easier to double apply, which is great. Ice Lightning Sword, one that's been one of the coolest buffs in the game, at least looking wise, that's never been super viable, is being buffed in terms of attack power and the duration of it, and the amount of lightning damage it increases, and the amount of time, between the end of the skill and being able to perform other actions is being reduced. So that's actually going to be viable. I can't wait to make a build around that. Some other ones that are being buffed, Loretta's Slash on Loretta's War Sickle itself is being increased. We did a build with this weapon. That's going to be stronger now. That's fantastic. Magma Guillotine got buffed. We just did a build with that. Corpse Piler is getting its damage attack increased. Rivers of Blood fans out there, what the hell? This is being buffed. So there are just tons of things being buffed in this build, and it should just make so many more things viable. There are a couple of nerfs, though. Shield Crash, the amount of status effect buildup if you have one on a shield when using this has been decreased. Seppuku got nerfed. That's not a big surprise. This thing's absolutely busted. The damage you take when you activate it has been increased, and the bleed status effect buildup granted by it has been reduced. And Bloodboon Ritual, the range and damage animation trigger on other players, the damage is unchanged. That is, of course, the weapon skill on Mogwin's Sacred Spear that he holds it up in the air and, hits someone with a blood that does blood buildup and damage. So that's obviously probably going to be easier to dodge now, is my guess, and not as easy to cast on players. There are also a lot of random bug fixes in the game and performance increases, which is great. But basically, that's the gist of it. A lot of Ashes of War that weren't viable, a lot of spells that weren't super viable are now buffed. That's mostly what this patch is, besides the separation of PvP and PvE balancing for the future of this game, which, in my opinion, is desperately, desperately needed. So if you've been itching to use some Ashes of War, or you really couldn't make them viable in the past, I see this a lot in my build comments. Can you make a build with Blah? I keep trying it, but it's not that great. It could be better now. And I obviously am going to have to go back through a lot of these and do some testing. And hopefully you'll see future builds with a lot of these things in them. Again, I plan to do a separate video probably tomorrow on the changes on how they affect builds I have already made, whether it makes them stronger or weaker. In most cases, it should be stronger from looking at it. But I want to go through these and just show you exactly how that will affect these so that you have a better idea. But that would be way too much to do in this video, so I'm not going to do it here. So what do you guys think of these patch changes? Is this not the best patch yet by From Software? I mean, they've had some awesome patches for this game. The post-launch support for this game is absolutely great. It makes one wonder if there's a DLC, which obviously they have to be working on, how, what we're going to see in that. And it's really great to see the game supported because it makes one believe that they're really going to do some banger DLC in the future and that these changes will make it even more enjoyable when we get there. What are you guys' thoughts? Let me know in the comments below.